Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about my book review of A Misplaced Massacre, Struggling Over the Memory of Sand Creek by Ari Kelman. Here's the book. It's a great book. We're all familiar with the story of Sand Creek Massacre by now. It was covered in Ann Hyde's Empires, Nations, and Families, as well as in our Frontiers text. Long story short, on November 29, 1864, elements of the U.S. Army attacked a peaceful encampment of Cheyenne and Arapaho, mainly women, children, and the elderly, along the banks of Sand Creek in Colorado. The result was a one-sided slaughter, and after the killing was over, soldiers of the U.S. Army looted and burned the encampment, committed atrocities on the bodies of the victims, and took body parts as trophies back to Denver. These are facts that are well documented. So we know the when and what, but almost immediately an awful lot of the why, how, and even where of the story of Sand Creek began to wander. White citizens of Colorado Territory tended to view the attack as justified given the circumstances of the time. Conflicts between settlers and Native Americans and the looming presence of the ongoing Civil War. But Native Americans felt differently about the whole thing. And even some soldiers present that day protested that the attack was disgraceful and unjustified, prompting a congressional investigation and ultimate condemnation for the actions of the U.S. Army that day. Although the tale continued to be spun out differently over the decades, depending on whose point of view you are looking from, I think it is telling that the political ambitions of the two main white protagonists in this story, Governor John Evans and the officer in command that day, John Chivington, were essentially extinguished after the congressional investigation. In A Misplaced Massacre, Ari Kelman deals with all of this controversy that surrounded the massacre at Sand Creek in 1864. But even more significantly, he ties it all in with the continuing controversy some 150 years later, when in the early part of this century, a National Historic Site was proposed to memorialize and interpret the events of that day. The book goes into a great deal of detail about how this process played out and continually jumps back and forth from the early 21st century to the mid-19th century. This helps illustrate how history is indeed a very fluid thing and how an historical event can be seen from many different angles, and all of them have a certain truth and value in telling the story. Ari Kelman points out that to the local white ranching community, for instance, the events at Sand Creek were a part of the great American narrative of manifest destiny and just another battle during the Civil War era to secure Colorado for the Union and to stop what were seen as violent depredations on the white settlers by the local Native American tribes. This viewpoint was as much in evidence in 2005 as it was in late 1865. One important thing about this viewpoint is that it was very much reinforced by the fact that the U.S. was involved in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2005, and the mood of the country was not really open to questioning the motives of the U.S. military. Of course, in 1865, you still had the Civil War going on, so there would have been much the same mood. To Native Americans, of course, Sand Creek was another cruel betrayal by the U.S. government, and again, this was as true in 1865 and continued to be so in the present day. Native Americans felt like even the proposal of the historic site was just another way of whites hijacking their own history. One of the most interesting parts of the book to me was the story of determining the actual location of the massacre. Native American tribes were certain that they knew where the events occurred, but to historians and archaeologists, the evidence was uncertain and contradictory. Hence the title of the book, A Misplaced Massacre. In this book, Ari Kelman does a fantastic job of relating the events of the past to what is still resonating in the present day. He shows us how history and memory are indeed very fluid things, and forging a common narrative about an event as significant as the Sand Creek Massacre is difficult at best, and might well be impossible. Ari Kelman is familiar to us through the Week 8 optional materials in this course in which he discussed Sand Creek. He received his PhD in history from Brown University in 1998 and is a professor of history at UC Davis. He has written extensively on the Indian Wars and the Civil War and has won a number of awards for both writing and teaching about American history. The book is very well researched and documented with some 75 pages of endnotes. Since this book jumps back and forth in time so much, the nature of this documentation varies quite a bit from primary sources all the way to interviews with people in our own time. A Misplaced Massacre won 5 awards after its publication in 2013. The scholarly reviews for the book are numerous and overwhelmingly positive. I enjoyed reading the book very much and learned a lot both about the Sand Creek Massacre itself, but more importantly, about the very nature of history itself and how we remember and memorialize the past. I will close out with an excerpt from a review of the book by Chuck Vollen of South Dakota University that I think sums things up nicely. He goes on to write, "The book's value comes from Kelman's thoughtful examination of the ways in which individuals and societies negotiate, remember, and memorialize the past. Kelman successfully weaves together events surrounding the site from the late 20th and early 21st centuries with those of 1864 to argue that American history is too contentious and its meaning too malleable for a single narrative." I highly recommend the book. Give it a read. Thank you.